Maria Santos never expected her quiet Tuesday evening to change everything. She was folding laundry in her small apartment near Camp Pendleton when the sound of screeching tires and a loud crash made her drop the towel she was holding. Living so close to the military base, she had grown used to the occasional sound of helicopters and training exercises, but this was different. This sounded like trouble. She rushed to her window and peered through the blinds. The street below was dark except for the flickering light from an overturned motorcycle. Steam was rising from what looked like a mangled bike, and she could see someone lying motionless on the asphalt. Without thinking twice, Maria grabbed her phone and ran downstairs, her heart pounding with each step. The scene was worse than she had imagined from her window. A young man in military fatigues was lying unconscious beside the motorcycle, blood pooling around his head. His breathing was shallow, and his left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. Maria had seen enough accidents during her years as a nurse to know this was serious. Very serious. She immediately called 911, her hands trembling as she spoke to the dispatcher. The ambulance would take at least 15 minutes to arrive, maybe longer given the remote location of her street. 15 minutes that this young soldier might not have. Maria had been a trauma nurse for 12 years before retiring early to care for her aging mother. Those instincts kicked in immediately. Kneeling beside the injured man, she checked his pulse and breathing. Both were weak, but present. The head wound was bleeding heavily, and she could see that his military ID tag had been thrown several feet away during the crash. She retrieved it and read the name. Corporal James Mitchell, United States Marine Corps. He looked so young, probably not even 25. Maria ran back to her apartment and grabbed her first aid supplies, blankets, and a pillow. She had always kept a well-stocked medical kit, a habit from her nursing days that her friends often teased her about. Tonight, she was grateful for that habit. Back beside Corporal Mitchell, she carefully applied pressure to the head wound with gauze pads, trying to stop the bleeding without moving him too much. She suspected a possible spinal injury and knew that any movement could make things worse. She covered him with blankets to prevent shock and spoke to him softly, even though he was unconscious. She had learned long ago that unconscious patients could sometimes hear voices, and familiar, calm voices could help stabilize them. The minutes crawled by like hours. Maria continued monitoring his vital signs as best she could without proper equipment. His pulse was getting weaker, and she noticed his lips were turning slightly blue. She was losing him, and the ambulance still had not arrived. That's when she made a decision that would haunt and inspire her for years to come. She carefully positioned herself to shield Corporal Mitchell from the cold night wind that had started picking up. The November air was getting colder, and she knew that hypothermia could kill him faster than his injuries. She lay down beside him, using her body heat to keep him warm while maintaining pressure on his wounds. For the next 23 minutes, Maria Santos lay on cold asphalt, holding a bleeding stranger, praying to every saint she could remember from her childhood. She talked to him about everything and nothing. She told him about her mother, about her cat, Mr. Whiskers, about the terrible coffee at the hospital where she used to work. She promised him that he was going to be okay, that help was coming, that someone cared about him. When the ambulance finally arrived, followed closely by a police car, Maria was shivering uncontrollably but still conscious and alert. The paramedics were surprised to find her there, covered in blood, but clearly not injured herself. She gave them a quick report of his condition and what she had done to help, then stepped back to let them work. As they loaded Corporal Mitchell onto a stretcher, one of the paramedics told her that her quick thinking had probably saved his life. The head injury was serious, but the fact that she had controlled the bleeding and kept him warm had prevented him from going into shock. The paramedic asked for her contact information in case the hospital needed to reach her, but Maria was too shaken to think clearly. She mumbled something about living upstairs and stumbled back to her apartment. The next morning, Maria woke up with dried blood under her fingernails and the events of the previous night feeling like a strange dream. She had barely slept, worrying about the young Marine and wondering if he had survived the night. She called the hospital, but they could not give her information about his condition due to privacy laws. All they could tell her was that he had been admitted and was in stable condition. Days passed without any word. Maria found herself looking out her window every evening, half expecting to see another accident, half hoping to see some sign that Corporal Mitchell was okay. She had thrown away her bloodstained clothes, but kept thinking about his face, so young and peaceful even while unconscious. She wondered if he had family, if someone was waiting for him to come home. A week after the accident, Maria was surprised to see a military vehicle parked outside her apartment building. She assumed it was just routine business related to the base nearby and did not think much of it. But when she heard footsteps on the stairs leading to her floor, something made her look through the peephole. 3 Marines in dress uniforms were standing outside her door. For a moment, Maria's heart stopped. In her mind, uniformed military personnel coming to someone's door meant only one thing: bad news about a loved one. But she had no family in the military. Then, she realized they might be there about Corporal Mitchell. Maybe he had not made it after all. With shaking hands, she opened the door. The 3 Marines stood at attention, their faces serious but not grim. The senior officer, a sergeant with multiple ribbons on his chest, stepped forward and asked if she was Maria Santos, the woman who had helped an injured Marine the previous week. When she confirmed her identity, something unexpected happened. All 3 Marines came to attention and saluted her. Not the casual acknowledgement she might have expected, but a full, formal military salute held for several long seconds. Maria stood there in her doorway, confused and overwhelmed, not knowing how to respond. The sergeant lowered his salute and explained that Corporal Mitchell was going to make a full recovery. The doctors had said that without her immediate intervention, he would have died from blood loss and exposure before the ambulance arrived. She had saved the life of a United States Marine, and they had come to thank her properly. But there was more. Corporal Mitchell had been conscious for 2 days and had been asking about the woman who stayed with him. He remembered her voice, talking to him throughout that long night on the cold pavement. He remembered feeling less afraid because someone was there, someone who cared enough to stay with a stranger in his darkest moment. The sergeant handed Maria a letter written in shaky handwriting. Corporal Mitchell was still recovering and could not travel, but he had insisted on writing to thank her. As she unfolded the letter, she noticed her hands were trembling again, just like they had that night on the asphalt. The letter was brief, but heartfelt. Corporal Mitchell thanked her for saving his life, but more than that, he thanked her for staying with him. He wrote that he had been far from home, with no family nearby, facing the scariest moment of his life alone. But she had made sure he was not alone. She had been his guardian angel when he needed one most. As Maria read the letter, tears began streaming down her face. She had been a nurse for many years and had helped countless patients, but this felt different. This was personal in a way that surprised her. Maybe it was because she had used her own body to keep him warm, or maybe it was because she had talked to him like a friend rather than a patient. Whatever the reason, she felt a connection to this young man she had never really met. The Marine stayed for a few more minutes, answering her questions about Corporal Mitchell's condition and recovery. They told her he would be returning to duty in a few months after physical therapy and full medical clearance. Before they left, the sergeant mentioned that Corporal Mitchell had requested something unusual. He wanted to meet her in person once he was well enough, to thank her properly, and to put a face with the voice that had kept him company during his darkest hour. 3 weeks after the Marine's visit, Maria received a phone call that would change her perspective on what it meant to serve others. Corporal Mitchell was being discharged from the hospital and wanted to meet her before he returned to duty. The hospital staff had arranged for them to meet in the family conference room, a quiet space away from the busy corridors and medical equipment that had surrounded him for weeks. Maria arrived at the hospital 30 minutes early, nervous in a way she had not expected. She had seen thousands of patients during her nursing career, but she had never met someone she had helped in such an intimate, life-or-death situation outside of a clinical setting. She wondered what they would talk about, what he would be like, whether the experience had changed him the way it had changed her. When Corporal Mitchell entered the room, Maria was struck by how different he looked from that night on the asphalt. He was walking with a slight limp and had a bandage covering part of his head, but he was alert, smiling, and very much alive. He was taller than she had imagined, with kind eyes that seemed older than his 24 years. The moment he saw her, his face lit up with recognition and something deeper, gratitude mixed with emotion that made his voice catch when he spoke. They talked for over 2 hours, sharing stories and filling in details about that night that neither had fully understood before. Corporal Mitchell told her that he remembered more than the doctors thought possible for someone with his head injury. He remembered her voice, the warmth of her presence, and, most importantly, he remembered not feeling alone. He had been returning from visiting a friend off base when his motorcycle hit a patch of oil on the road, sending him skidding into a parked car. Maria learned that James Mitchell was from a small town in Ohio, the eldest of 3 children. His parents had flown out immediately when they heard about the accident, and they had specifically asked to meet the woman who saved their son's life. James explained that his family wanted to thank her personally, but he had asked them to wait. He wanted to meet her first, to have a conversation that was just between the two of them. As they talked, Maria realized that the young Marine had been profoundly affected by the experience beyond just the physical trauma. He spoke about lying there in the darkness, feeling his strength leaving him, and then hearing her voice cutting through the fear and confusion. He told her that at one point he had been ready to let go, to stop fighting, but her voice had anchored him to life. James shared something that surprised Maria. He had joined the Marines to serve others, to protect people, to make a difference. But lying on that asphalt, he had been the one who needed protecting. For the first time in his adult life, he had been completely helpless, completely dependent on the kindness of a stranger. It had humbled him in a way that military training never could. The conversation took an unexpected turn when James asked Maria about her own life. She found herself opening up about her recent retirement from nursing, her decision to care for her elderly mother, and her sometimes lonely life in the apartment near the base. She had not realized how isolated she had become until she started talking about it with this young man who listened with such genuine interest. James told her that meeting her had reinforced his belief in the goodness of people. In his military training, he had learned to be suspicious, to watch for threats, to trust but verify. But Maria had restored his faith in pure, selfless human kindness. She had risked her own safety to help a complete stranger, with no thought of reward or recognition. When their meeting was coming to an end, James made a request that surprised Maria. He asked if he could stay in touch with her, not just to express ongoing gratitude, but because he genuinely wanted her in his life. He said he felt like she had become part of his story in a way that could not be undone, and he wanted to be part of hers as well. Over the following months, an unlikely friendship developed between the retired nurse and the young Marine. James would call her every few weeks, updating her on his recovery and eventual return to active duty. Maria found herself looking forward to these calls more than she wanted to admit. His youthful enthusiasm and optimism reminded her of aspects of life she had forgotten during her years of dealing with medical emergencies and family responsibilities. James introduced Maria to some of his fellow Marines, and she became an unofficial mother figure to several young servicemen who were far from home. She would invite them for dinner, help them with practical problems like banking or dealing with landlords, and provide a listening ear when they needed to talk about the stresses of military life. Her apartment became a refuge where Marines could relax and feel like they were part of a family. The relationship was beneficial for Maria as well. Taking care of others had always been her calling, but she had lost some of her sense of purpose when she retired from nursing. These young Marines gave her a new way to serve, a new family to care for. Her mother, who had been worried about Maria's social isolation, was delighted to see her daughter engaged with life again. 6 months after the accident, James was preparing for deployment overseas. Before he left, he wanted to do something special for Maria. Working with his commanding officer and fellow Marines, he arranged for a ceremony that would publicly recognize her heroic actions that night. Maria was reluctant to accept any recognition, insisting that she had simply done what anyone would do, but James was persistent. The ceremony took place on a sunny Saturday morning at Camp Pendleton. Maria arrived thinking she would be meeting James and a few of his friends for a casual goodbye. Instead, she found herself facing a formation of over 200 Marines in dress uniforms, with families and base personnel gathered for what had become a formal recognition ceremony. The base commander, Colonel Sarah Williams, presented Maria with a Civilian Medal of Appreciation and read a citation describing her actions. But the most moving moment came when James stepped forward to speak. He told the assembled crowd about that night, about Maria's courage and compassion, and about how her actions had saved not just his life, but had also renewed his faith in the fundamental goodness of humanity. As James spoke, Maria noticed that many of the Marines were emotionally affected by his words. These were tough, trained warriors who faced danger as part of their daily lives, but they understood the profound significance of what had happened that night. One civilian had put herself at risk to save one of their own, expecting nothing in return, asking for no recognition. After the formal ceremony, there was a reception where Maria met the families of many Marines. She was amazed to learn how many people had heard the story of what she had done. Parents thanked her not just for saving James, but for representing the kind of civilian support that gave them comfort when their sons and daughters were serving overseas. Knowing that there were people like Maria in communities near military bases made them feel less afraid for their children's safety. The event was covered by the local newspaper and military publications, but Maria found the public attention uncomfortable. She had not saved James Mitchell to become famous or to be recognized as a hero. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, because she could not have lived with herself if she had not tried to help. But James helped her understand that the recognition was not really about her. It was about showing other people that individual actions mattered, that ordinary citizens could make extraordinary differences in the lives of others. By accepting the recognition gracefully, she was encouraging others to step up when they encounter people in need. As James prepared to deploy, he gave Maria a gift that moved her to tears. It was a photo of the two of them taken during his hospital recovery, but more importantly, it was accompanied by letters from his family members. His parents, his younger sister, and his brother had all written to thank her for saving James and to tell her how much her friendship meant to their family. The letters revealed something that James had been too modest to tell her himself. His family had been struggling with his decision to join the Marines, worried about the dangers he would face. The accident had been their worst nightmare realized, but Maria's actions had shown them that even in the most dangerous situations, there were good people watching out for their son. It had given them peace about his military service that they had not felt before. The morning after James deployed overseas, Maria woke up feeling an emptiness she had not expected. Over the months of their friendship, she had grown accustomed to his regular phone calls, his visits, and the steady stream of young Marines who had started coming to her apartment for dinner and conversation. Now, with James gone and many of his friends transferred to other bases or deployed as well, her apartment felt too quiet again. But James had left her with more than just memories. Before departing, he had connected her with the Family Readiness Group, a network of military families who supported each other during deployments. Maria found herself becoming an unofficial coordinator for care packages and a contact person for Marines families who wanted to send letters or gifts to their deployed children. The work kept her busy and connected to a community she had never expected to be part of. Every few weeks, she would organize package packing sessions in her apartment with military spouses and parents gathering to send homemade cookies, toiletries, magazines, and letters to Marines overseas. Her small apartment became a hub of activity that her elderly mother watched with amazement and pride. 2 months into James's deployment, Maria received a phone call that would test everything she had learned about military families and the bonds they shared. Sergeant Patricia Williams, one of the Marines Maria had befriended through James, had been injured in an IED explosion in Afghanistan. She was being flown to a military hospital in Germany before being transferred back to the United States for extended treatment. Patricia's parents lived across the country and could not afford to fly out immediately. They called Maria, whom Patricia had listed as an emergency contact, asking if she could be at the hospital when Patricia arrived. Without hesitation, Maria drove the 4 hours to the medical facility, arriving just as the transport plane was landing. Seeing Patricia on a hospital stretcher, unconscious and surrounded by medical equipment, brought back all the emotions Maria had felt that night with James. But this time, she was not alone in a dark street. She was part of a community that rallied around its wounded members. Other Marines from Patricia's unit were already at the hospital, along with staff from the Family Readiness Group and volunteers from local veteran organizations. Maria stayed with Patricia for 3 days until her parents could arrange to fly out. During that time, she witnessed the incredible network of support that surrounded military families in crisis. People she had never met brought food, offered places to stay, and provided emotional support without being asked. It was a level of care and commitment that extended far beyond blood relationships. When Patricia woke up disoriented and frightened, the first thing she saw was Maria's familiar face. Just as James had been comforted by Maria's presence during his darkest moment, Patricia found strength in knowing that someone who cared about her was there. The circle of care that had started with Maria helping James had grown to encompass many more people. During Patricia's recovery, Maria learned more about the realities of military life than she had ever imagined. These young people faced dangers and challenges that most civilians could barely comprehend, yet they continued to serve with courage and dedication. But they also dealt with loneliness, fear, and the constant stress of being separated from their families and familiar surroundings. James called Maria from overseas whenever he could get access to a phone or internet connection. Their conversations had evolved from gratitude and friendship to something deeper, a genuine care for each other's well-being that transcended the circumstances of how they met. James told her that knowing she was taking care of his fellow Marines gave him peace of mind that allowed him to focus on his mission. Through James, Maria learned about the psychological challenges that combat veterans faced. He confided in her about difficult missions, about friends who had been injured or killed, and about the weight of responsibility he felt for the Marines under his command. Maria found herself becoming not just a friend, but a confidential counselor who helped him process experiences that were too intense to share with his family back home. The relationship was transforming Maria as much as it was helping James. Her years as a nurse had taught her about physical healing, but her involvement with military families was teaching her about emotional resilience and the healing power of community support. She was learning that sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was simply to be present, to listen without judgment, and to maintain connection across time and distance. A year after the original accident, James returned from his deployment. The reunion at the airport was emotional for both of them, but Maria was struck by how much he had changed. He was still the kind, optimistic young man she had grown to love like a son, but there was a maturity and depth to him that spoke of difficult experiences and hard-won wisdom. James had a month of leave before reporting to his new assignment, and he spent much of that time with Maria and her mother. He helped with household repairs, drove Maria's mother to medical appointments, and generally made himself indispensable to their small family. Maria realized that the relationship had become truly reciprocal. They were taking care of each other. During his visit, James told Maria about his plans for the future. He was considering applying for officer training, with the goal of eventually becoming a career Marine. But he also talked about his desire to give back to civilian communities to build bridges between military and civilian populations. He credited Maria with showing him how much civilians and military personnel could mean to each other when they took the time to connect. Before James left for his new assignment, he made a proposal that would change Maria's life again. The Marine Corps was looking for civilians to participate in a new program that paired retired professionals with active-duty military personnel for mentoring and support. Would Maria consider becoming an official volunteer coordinator for the program? The position would involve training, travel to different military bases, and coordination with families and military units across the country. It would mean leaving her quiet life near Camp Pendleton and taking on responsibilities she had never imagined. But it would also mean taking the care and connection she had discovered with James and Patricia and extending it to many more military families. Maria accepted the position, and within 6 months, she was traveling regularly to military bases, training volunteers, and helping to establish support networks for deployed personnel and their families. Her apartment near Camp Pendleton became a model for the kind of civilian-military partnership the program was trying to create nationwide. The work was demanding and sometimes emotionally difficult, but Maria had found her calling. She discovered that her years as a nurse, combined with her experience caring for her mother and her friendship with James and other Marines, had prepared her for this role in ways she could never have anticipated. She was helping to build a bridge between military and civilian communities that strengthened both sides. 3 years after that November night, when she heard a motorcycle crash outside her window, Maria received a letter that brought her story full circle. It was from James, now Lieutenant Mitchell, writing to inform her that he was engaged to be married. His fiancée was a nurse he had met at a military hospital, and he credited Maria with teaching him to appreciate the healing power of compassionate care. The letter included an invitation to the wedding, but more than that, included a request. James and his fiancée wanted Maria to be honored at their wedding as the person whose example had inspired their relationship and their shared commitment to serving others. They wanted to dedicate their marriage to the principle that had guided Maria's actions that night, that we are all responsible for taking care of each other. At the wedding, held at a chapel on Camp Pendleton, Maria was introduced to hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of her decision to help an injured stranger. There were Marines she had counseled, families she had supported during deployments, and volunteers who had joined a mentoring program she now coordinated. There were also people she had never met, friends of friends, family members of volunteers, civilians who had been inspired to find their own ways to support military communities. During the reception, the base commander presented Maria with a special recognition for her years of volunteer service. But the most meaningful moment came when James and his new wife asked her to stand with them for their first dance as a married couple. As they moved slowly around the dance floor, James whispered his thanks one more time, not just for saving his life, but for showing him what a life dedicated to serving others could look like. Looking around the reception hall filled with Marines in dress uniforms, military families, and civilian volunteers, Maria reflected on how much had changed since that cold November night. A split-second decision to help a stranger had led to a new life purpose, an extended family of military personnel and their loved ones, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve. The accident that had brought James Mitchell into her life had been random and terrible, but the connections that grew from her response to it had been intentional and beautiful. She had learned that heroism was not about dramatic gestures or special qualifications. It was about choosing to act with compassion when someone needed help, regardless of the personal cost. As the evening wound down and the newly married couple prepared to leave for their honeymoon, James pulled Maria aside for a private conversation. He told her that he had kept the hospital bracelet from the night of his accident, and that he looked at it whenever he needed to remember what courage looked like. He said that she had saved more than his life that night. She had saved his faith in the goodness of humanity. Maria drove home that night, knowing that her life had been as transformed as James's by the events that began with a motorcycle crash. She had started as a retired nurse, living quietly with her elderly mother, but she had become part of a community dedicated to supporting those who serve their country. The young man she had shielded with her body on a cold night had become the son she had never had, and through him, she had found a family larger than she had ever dreamed possible. The last entry in Maria's journal that night was simple but profound. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is just show up when someone needs help. Everything else follows from there. It was a lesson she would carry with her as she continued her work with military families, and a truth she would share with everyone who asked her about the night that changed everything.